But yeah, so with the research, they've literally proven that most of us will spend 2 hours and they'll say, "Oh, I don't have the time. I don't have the time." Actually, most of us can carve 10 minutes out of our day to be quiet. There's a great author, I'm sure you know him, a man called Rupert Sheldrake, and he wrote this. He showed how most people it's a loaded statement, how many of us, right, we'll be in our cars or walking and all of a sudden we'll just turn around and stare back at someone who's staring at us. And he proved that not only can we do this, but we can do this when we're facing the polar opposite direction. We know the direction that the other person is looking from, and it can happen many, many kilometers or miles away. So many people worldwide, for example, will dream of natural disasters before they happen. Collective intuition about places that many times people don't live in those places. I had these incredibly intuitive psychic experiences when I was younger, and then I was kind of told that that wasn't okay, really, to some degree, not by my family, but people at school, actually. If you're disconnected from your intuition, it's not that it ceases to exist, it's there.
Have you ever noticed how quickly you dismiss that quiet inner nudge, only to regret it later? Well, most of us aren't missing intuition, we're blocked from it. We've been conditioned to trust logic and ignore the whispers of the unconscious. But intuition isn't mystical, it's a natural human capacity. The real question is, how do you reopen the bridge between your thinking mind and that deeper inner knowing? In today's episode, psychologist and author Athena Laz reveals why so many of us are cut off from our intuition power and how to reclaim it through the archetypal door Jungian psychology calls the medial archetype. If you have ever struggled to trust yourself, second guessed your instincts, or longed for clearer guidance, this conversation will give you the tools to reconnect with the wisdom you already carry. So let's dive in. Well, hello, beautiful souls. We've got another amazing guest for you, somebody that we had on the show a little while ago. But for those that don't know, it's Athena Laz. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm so excited to be joining you again in conversation.
I know, and this one, I know this one's going to be a little bit more different because it's about your new book that's sitting right beside you. But for those that don't know you, Athena, what inspired you to do what you do today?
Well, so I've always had a very vivid dream life. And when I was younger, and still now, I had a lot of intuitive and psychic experiences. And then as life progressed for me, I hit my 20s and really found the path of psychology, and well, it found me in some ways. And at the same time, I was very interested in learning about a lot of metaphysical things. And so naturally, I just feel like my life brought me to this position because I've had all these quite, I wouldn't say unexplained experiences, but maybe not what people traditionally think. And then I'm also very attracted to the realm of the psyche, to psychology and how it does help us. And so my work marries that. And I feel like the reason I do this work is because in my own experiences for a long time, it was split. People often think of like one category, oh, if you're this kind of person, that's what you think and believe in, or if you're too woo woo or whatever it is. So that's how I find myself doing what I do, really.
I love it. And I even love the word. You hardly ever hear the word woo woo anymore because it's become such the norm. And I think with all the whole quantum physics and the science aspect of it, there's no such thing as woo woo, I don't think anymore. Anyway.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about your book, because last time we had you on the show, for those that haven't listened to it, go back to it, and we'll have it on the show notes. And we really unpacked all about dreams and so forth. But this time I think we're going to be unpacking all about the medial archetypes.
Yes, that's
So
exactly.
maybe let's start with that. What is a medial archetype?
So, well, thank you. It links into dreaming as well. So, the medial archetype or the medial woman archetype was this notion that this late analyst called Tony Wolff came up with. And she was this, I think, quite brilliant woman who lived in the like sort of 1950s time period. She was developing a lot of her own work, and she was a close collaborator of Jung's. But they also had an intimate relationship, and so it was a very sort of interesting dynamic. And she wrote this very tiny paper called "The Structural Forms of the Feminine Psyche." It was like 15 pages long, roundabout. And in it, she mapped out the term the medial woman archetype. And pretty much she suggested that in every woman, there is this deep part of us that can navigate the unseen and seen. She didn't use that language. That's my language, right? And when I wrote The Alchemy of Your Dreams, this is back in 2021, I had just written a passage in the book about bridging the waking world and the dream world. And I got this intuitive hit of the name medial. And I know what medial meant. Like I took it to mean middle, medium kind of thing, but I knew it was more than that. So I Googled medial and her paper popped up. And I knew that that archetype was the very archetype that I had worked or I guess was interacting with whilst I was writing The Alchemy of Your Dreams. But so for anyone who's listening, the way I position it, and I bring this archetype into our times, right? Because Tony Wolff wrote about it in the 50s, and it's amazing, but there are definitive differences nowadays, right? So I believe we can all connect with this part of ourselves, that it's doesn't really matter how you identify or how you perceive your identity to be, really. And this part of us is really the intuitive, mediumistic, and the mediator functions that we have within our psyche, but also how we relate to spirit or the unseen, how we relate to other people, how we relate to nature, and also how we relate to our own inner worlds. So there's a whole lot that goes with this archetype. And I think it's arising in collective consciousness and our collective experience. Because the world is currently banging around in a lot of extremes. And so, as an archetypal energy, this medial energy is very much a bridge maker. So I think that's the collective part of it. But we also have this amazing ability to benefit on a personal level when we work with this archetype.
And with the medial archetype being the feminine aspect, is it different to the male and female archetype that resides within us? Is this something completely different?
So I think that's a very interesting and good question. And I know in traditional Jungian analysis, there is a definitive difference, right? In the way I have approached this archetype, in the book specifically, is I've given examples of how this archetype can appear in many forms, like a guardian, like the temperance card in tarot, which is kind of masculine and feminine. And then I've also given examples of medial men and medial women. But if we're strictly looking at it from a Jungian perspective, like in the anima animus, I feel like there's room for this, because the way I feel about it is that an archetypal energy is this like structural energy, and actually we tend to project a lot onto those images, or those types of energies, should I say. And so when I was writing the book, the way it kind of felt to me is that actually it didn't really matter whether it was feminine or masculine. Maybe we perceive it in the way we need most. So the psyche will show it to us in our counterbalance to help us recognize. But for me, really, the masculine, feminine part of it is quite irrelevant if you touch the resonance of it. Um, I know that maybe people will listen to that and not agree with me. And so I actually open up. The invitation is there for other people to take their um, experiences with this archetype, especially if it's new, and run with it. I think we'll be seeing a lot more about it. So it's kind of an interesting space to be in.
I love it. And just the way that we were talking about bridging between the male and the female, because it's interesting. Just last week, I was facilitating a class, and we were talking about the masculine and the feminine within us. And even though I'm a woman, I'm very in touch of my masculine side because I'm always in the doing, not in the
Right.
receiving and not in the being. And so that in itself takes practice, because we do have these two archetypes that resonates or resides within us, and it's about the balance of the two, the harmony of the two. And it's almost like when you talk about the medial archetype, it's almost like when you're saying the bridge, it's almost like the connection of the two.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it very much is. And then it, to me, the way um I think I share in the book, and hopefully I do that in a way that feels tangible for people, is to show that how, when we're in that state of balance, right? If we take, if we strip the language down, and let's say we are receptive and we can be in a passive state, or we can be active and in much more directive, right? And whatever we perceive that to be, whatever imagery or symbols we put onto it, that's great, that's helpful, right? But we can understand that there's a definitive flow between these two states. And when they start to feel extreme, we have to, something naturally happens. Like either we'll have a shocking dream, or there'll be some crisis event in our life, or it might just even be a transitional stage. Like you might hit, I was talking to someone else about that this morning, like you hit midlife, and life, oh, it's this huge transition. And so it naturally may kick it in where you have to look at these energies, or these different states of being, and see how you've been mediating them, right? And so yes, it absolutely is. I'm kind of tentative to label them as masculine and feminine, even though I write the book in the feminine form. And I wrote the book in the feminine form because I wanted to pay, um, almost like respect to Tony Wolff, for having seen this and mapping it out in the 50s. And the archetype appeared to me in the feminine form first. But after writing the book, I really feel like part of, I guess, where I feel like this may be helpful is that sometimes I feel like we get stuck in the duality of it because of the symbols and the labels that we place onto it. Those things are very helpful to us. And I'm not saying we should obliterate that out of language. Absolutely not. But when we're working with the medial form, it's more helpful, in my opinion, to open ourselves up to experiencing it as movement as opposed to a structured thing. Because the minute we've labeled it and we've solidified it even into symbol, we've locked it into a pattern. And then the medial is much more fluid than that. So I'm not sure if that even makes sense to anyone listening, but it definitively will make sense if people read the book.
It makes sense absolutely, because you're not putting it in a box. You're not putting it, like you said, a structure around it, because if it's intuitive, it's fluid, right? So it's more of like, if it's a movement, then it's more of a feeling rather than so how do we know? So for example, how do we know, because you're talking about the medial archetype is the bridge between the conscious and unconscious, let's say, because you were saying between the dream and the awakening. So how do we recognize this medial archetype when it is connecting with us, whether it's conscious or unconscious? I mean, is it through symbology? Is it through feeling? Like, how do we connect with it?
Thank you. That's such a great question. I feel that the way we can connect with the medial, one of the easiest ways, is to begin to pay attention to our dreams and to just start noting them down to see what kind of symbols and people or figures appear. And so the medial archetype, as it being a bridge between the two, it's more like a mirror for us, in the sense that when we are in the medial way of being, we can easily move between the waking world and the dream world, or we can move from the between the unconscious and the conscious, meaning that like we can have an experience in waking life through a symbol, let's say through synchronicity, right? We see a sign out in the world and we take that to be meaningful, and then the medial part of it is, oh, well, that connection doesn't end at the moment synchronicity happens. It continues through and can, if we're working with it in this way, into dreaming. And so it's this broad spectrum way of interacting and being. But a very tangible example of this is, well, I feel a lot of people, and from hearing different people's perspectives, because this is kind of an unknown archetype for the most part, um, people have been sharing with me some of their dreams in relation to this. And people will dream of things like getting a letter in the mail. That could be like a really great indicator of the medial kind of symbol, right? Or being on a bridge, especially after listening to this kind of conversation, you're bridging two different things, right? But like with dream work, and something that I think we spoke about in our last podcast, you have to be very mindful of what's happening in your waking life at the same time to understand that. So a bridge does not always mean, oh, this is the medial archetype. No, no. It can mean many things, which I know you know, but this is really just for anyone who's listening, right? So the medial archetype can present as an angel in dreams. In myth, a really good example of the medial archetype would be the goddess Iris. She's literally a goddess who travels on a rainbow bridge, and she mediates messages between like the divine gods and the mere mortals back in Greek myth, right? She is a great example of a medial archetype in myth, and she has a beautiful infinity sign on the top of her imagery as well, and we see that balance, right? That movement. So there are lots of medial images in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, right? She wrote a very small chapter on the medial archetype. And in that book, she also shares how it's very much linked to the wild nature. So this archetype has huge implications, huge connections. It's not static, and it's a very broad. And the reason I'm saying that is I feel like often we kind of have the tendency where we want to like, it's helpful to kind of just like land it, right? To really like ground it into waking life. And we can absolutely do that with this archetype, but there are multiple pathways which we can choose to work with. So dreams being one, myth being one. You could even work with tarot cards. So really, there's a whole range.
Yeah, because we were talking. I can't remember if we were talking about it before we came on the show, but we were talking about projection, right? So obviously, we're always projecting. So when we're projecting this medial archetype, if we're looking at, because I mean, I always say our external world is a reflection of our internal world. So if this medial archetype is bridging the conscious and the unconscious, right? I'm just thinking like, what kind of projections are we putting out into our world for us to know this is the medial archetype giving us a warning or a sign, apart from all those symbology that you're talking about, the infinite sign and the bridge and the angels? That's more like in our sleep state. What about in our wake state? Can you give us some examples what that would look like?
Sure. So I think it's a very helpful discernment that you're picking up here. And I think that this is part of the natural journey of learning and being human, right? Where we easily can project onto things, and we do. It's a natural tendency. The difference being for me when archetypal symbols appear in waking life, um, they carry weight to them generally, and they're usually emergent, right? They appear without prompting often. So, for example, and here's the thing, it's also not this or that. So now that, say, someone's listened to this podcast and they now understand, they have a good image for the medial archetype, let's say as a rainbow. Um, they may now walk in their waking life and see a rainbow and think of the medial archetype. That, on one level, can be projection, but also because the psyche has understood the symbol and the meaning behind it, right, or the ascribed meaning, the field we interact with, the reality we interact with can also produce that now. The best way I can explain this, and I deviate from traditional thought in this space, right? So for example, and this is what Tony talks about in her paper as well, to some degree. If you've ever been to a medium, or if I'm doing like intuitive readings for someone, I will get symbols that mean specific things to me. It's a body of symbols that I've worked with for a long time. And the non-physical, say those who have crossed over or even just higher consciousness that we're interacting with, can provide you with imagery and symbols. The difference being that you know that those symbols carry specific weight and are not projections. There isn't this like wishful thinking behind it. So I don't see this rainbow and think, oh yes, that means I'm going to win the lotto. It goes, there's something there for me to pay attention to. Like the reality around me is responding. So I know you know the story, but for anyone listening, right, one of the most, I think, prolific stories about Jung and his theory of synchronicity, which links back to other wisdom traditions. So we're talking about something very old, but he had a patient who was very much struggling, and they were stuck in a very locked pattern where she, from what it sounds like in the stories, she was struggling to break through whatever was holding her back. And she had explained, I think, a dream before about a beetle, or there was a significance about that symbol. And in the moment of them discussing it, they heard something banging on the window, and a very rare beetle in Vienna, Austria, wherever they were at the time, appeared in the therapy room, right? So that's how we know the difference. There is weight behind the symbols. And then if we're working on an archetypal level, to me, archetypes carry their own weight and energy. It isn't just what um, we're in relationship to and with them, and so it's kind of different in the same way that I believe we're in relationship with our dreaming, not just in a oh, I run around all day long and now I'm dreaming a whole lot of nonsense. No, it can be a deeper state of awareness in there.
Yeah, so I think it's like you're I always look at symbology. It's the meaning that we give it in the moment. It's what comes up for us or what we are feeling or experiencing when we see a rainbow or a beetle or whatever that may be. I love that. So because obviously there's a lot of people listening to this show or watching this show and going, well, I've never worked with archetypes before. I wouldn't even have a clue where to start. So how do we connect? Is it just a matter of start being conscious about this medial archetype, calling her in, meditating? Like, how do we start connecting with this medial archetype?
I think all the ways you've suggested are so beautiful. I will say this: everyone to some degree has worked or viewed an archetype. If a person watching this is brand new to archetypes, just think about like Star Wars. It's this epic story about light and dark. They're heroes. There we go on a hero's journey. That is an archetype, right? It's a great structure. that humanity kind of tends towards. And so with the medial archetype, I feel because we all sleep and dream, and to Tony's work, she is the mediator between the unconscious and unconscious. We all naturally probably are in touch with this archetype to some degree. And so my recommendation would be, before people go and kind of just incubate working with this guide, find out a little bit about what it is that this guide presents with. Because so from my side, right, in my experience of it, they're amazing positives that come with this, like increased discernment, very much being able to learn to trust in the unknown. That's actually like a prerequisite of working with this archetype. If you're thrown into any liminal or threshold passage, that the medial archetype is incredibly helpful, right? So transitioning between different life stages, or anything like that, so there are really great benefits with working with this archetype, but there are also difficult aspects of any archetype. And so people who tend towards being medial, they can feel often very engulfed by what's happening outside of them, because they're so in tune with the collective undercurrent that they can tap into. And so, like, very pragmatic things are practicing healthy boundaries. So, for anyone who's completely new to it, just to get a kind of bigger picture, that when we're working with these kind of with archetypes, it's a broad field, and it provides us both with not good things and bad things. That's way too linear, but they're definitive processes that we will go through during the journey of working with an archetype, much like how a hero goes on a journey and they're faced with specific challenges, and they have to go through, they meet allies, and then it's really difficult, or whatever the process is. It's kind of the same with the medial archetype, and I share that in my book, part of the initiation that people tend to go through when they work with this kind of archetypal energy.
So you're speaking very much of the light and the shadow of the archetype, which is
Yeah.
not good or bad. It just is, right?
Right.
So for us to struggle to trust our intuition, because it sounds like this medial archetype is very, very much based on intuition. And I know there's a lot of individuals out there struggle with intuition, because then their mind gets in the way. Is it really is that my rational mind, or is that how I'm feeling? Or so how does a medial archetype help us claim that trust within ourselves? Because it is like intuitively, I know it took me a long time to trust my intuition, and I'm sure there's a lot more people out there in the same boat.
Well, it's such a great thing that you bring up, because I feel like to my own experience, the same thing happened to me. I had these incredibly intuitive psychic experiences when I was younger. And then I was kind of told that that wasn't okay, really, to some degree, not by my family, but people at school, actually. And so I think a lot of this is actually the great unlearning that we have to go through. And the best thing that I can suggest for people listening to this, right, is if you're disconnected from your intuition, it's not that it ceases to exist. It's there, and it's actually always working, whether you really consciously acknowledge it or not. So the best way forward to me is to treat it quite playfully at the beginning, and just to invite it back in. You could literally say something quite simple like, I'm willing to participate in more intuitive experiences. I'm open to this. Very much like how, if we're incubating a dream, or we want to hoping to receive guidance in our sleep, we can put out an intention to have that happen. And we know that that does work, right? There's research behind that backs that. And most of the time, people will say, we'll start with fun things like, try and see if you can guess where the next best parking space is. Before you pick up your phone and look at your email, try and just see if you can pick up on who that next email will be from, or what kind of tone it will be. do it on things that actually have no severe consequence in your life, right? So take the pressure off completely. And the more you do this, the more you experience intuition in real time, and it becomes much, much harder to diminish it, to discredit it, right? There's a great author, I'm sure you know him, a man called Rupert Sheldrake, and he wrote this. I mean, he's written lots of stuff, but he showed how most people, it's a loaded statement, how many of us, right, will be in our cars or walking, and all of a sudden we'll just turn around and stare back at someone who's staring at us. And we take that as a total given. And he proved that not only can we do this, but we can do this when we're facing the polar opposite direction. We know the direction that the other person is looking from, and it can happen many, many kilometers or miles away. That is such a pragmatic example of intuition that I feel like most people have experienced. And the doubting mind, now the rational mind will go, oh, okay, there must be some reason for this. Maybe it's like something in the air, the air shifts or whatever. Okay, maybe, but maybe it's this and that, right? Maybe we've been too cut off, and actually, we have so many experiences. So many people worldwide, for example, will dream of natural disasters before they happen. Collective intuition about places that many times people don't live in those places, but we feel it and we can experience it. And so doubt is good. We need doubt. I talk about this deeply in my book about how we have we have three dominant forms of perception, and doubt falls in a very helpful aspect of one, right? So it's really just a journey, I guess. And my main advice is don't take it all so seriously. Just practice a little bit and see what comes up.
I love that. And I think that's really important to have a bit of fun with it rather than try to take it too seriously. Because, I think also we're so externally focused because of what's happening in the world at the moment. And I can't tell you how many people, Athena, that I speak to that are very influenced by their external world and are miserable. And even to sit in silence and meditation is too confronting. So how would you help those people just as a little step, or, and I'm sure there's some like little how-tos in your book that you could share, but for those that do have that resistance towards sitting silently with themselves, I mean, is that even the shadow aspect of the medial archetype?
I mean, that's a brilliant question. And I'm not even sure if that would be part of the shadow of it. But literally in my book, I say if you can practice just sitting still for 20 minutes every day, you will really be well on your way to experiencing multi-dimensional or expanded awareness and the medial archetype, right? So for anyone who's listening to this and that feels really difficult, again, my suggestion would be playful about it, right? If 20 minutes feels too hard, go for 2. Then the next day, go for 4. In the book, I share research about how the average person will spend a minimum of 2 hours online scrolling things that are kind of like unnecessary, right? So people will often say to me, when I say, oh, you maybe quiet down, just try go for a quiet walk even, and you don't have to be sitting. I think that's also a fallacy that you need to be like sitting still somewhere. It doesn't need to be, you could just be in your garden pottering along, and that's good, you know. But yeah, so with the research, they've literally proven that most of us will spend 2 hours, and they'll say, oh, I don't have the time, I don't have the time. Actually, most of us can carve 10 minutes out of our day to be quiet. And my response back to people who say that is that, can you afford to not sit in those 20 minutes? Because in those 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 5, you can literally quieten down any fear. We have so much fear coming at us at this point in time, exactly like what you're saying. So many people are so unhappy because it's hard not to be when you are being engulfed entirely by very threatening and fearful news. And so what's the cost, and I think this is also part of lucidity, what we spoke about in our last podcast. There's something here about taking kind of responsibility for the discomfort that it puts us into and being okay with it. Discomfort is not a naturally threatening place to be. It can actually also be a space of expansion. It can be both. It can make you feel deeply uncomfortable and at the same time be very good for you. So that's the invitation. It's definitively not easy, but it gets easier with practice.
I always look at the resistance or even the uncomfortableness of anything is when you're at the edge of growth, when you're at the edge of expansion. So I think that if we and once again, it's the meaning we give it, right? So
Right.
it's not, we're not stuck, we're not broken. But if you look at it, oh, okay, so the resistance here or the whatever, the doubt that I'm experiencing is actually the change that I'm about to step into. That's why I'm feeling the resistance. And so to just sit with that, I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, and it's so hard, and I think that's something that I've come to learn, and have been humbled by life in many ways to learn this, right? Is that there is definitely no arrival point. This is like a lifelong practice to me, and it's not about perfection. Some days are vastly easier than others. Sometimes I can interact with those. Just even holding polarity much better than other days. And I've come to learn that part of this process is just returning softly over and over again and allowing that repair time to be much quicker, So instead of kind of spiraling that, oh, I wasn't courageous enough to sit in the discomfort, or I've maybe grown a bit and then backtracked. Which happens all the time, and it happens. I go through that all the time. So I have learned to just go, oh, okay, in those moments where I am afraid and I do feel fear about whatever it is, to be very self-compassionate, but then to not also give up at the same time. So I think that's exactly the beautiful paradox of being able to experience all these things that we can, right? And also to hold them and just be very, I think, kind to oneself and also to others who are also going through whatever they are going through, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Even just the word arrival, I always look at it as more of an alignment than an arrival,
Right.
because then we think that we have to go somewhere or get to some place to maybe get in touch with the archetypes that we speak about. It's just really aligning ourselves with that medial archetype or whatever archetype for
Right.
us to connect with. I mean, that's just from my experience anyway. I'd love to hear it from your experience.
I resonate with your experience deeply. And I think that part of this is recognizing that alignment is so valuable, because when we're in that alignment space, it isn't about doing, it's actually about being and being comfortable in that space. And so when you suggested this wonderful thing of just being sitting still and being quiet, wow, look how hard that is for us, because we've been taught to do the polar opposite. And the way, because of technology, that its natural tendency is speed, right? So anyone who's ever just had a quick conversation with ChatGPT, like it's all fast, right? Everything is happening at this hyper pace. And I think there's so many reasons for that that's maybe like a whole other conversation. But we are not necessarily primed to go at those speeds all the time. And so we've learned that we should be trying to get to these speeds or be at these speeds or arrive at these places or be doing. And a lot of it actually is a stripping away. Part of what I feel this archetype specifically does, but actually any transitional point in life, right? Um, it strips you of the things that make you do that, right? Like a health crisis is a really good example of that. that it's kind of like, oh, okay, so there's a natural pausing stop. Turning 40, that can be a huge, a lot of people feel that, right? Where identity is kind of stripped away in a very different things, or the pursuits that people have been following no longer appeal because, oh, maybe you've been doing them for 20 years and actually, do you still feel in alignment with them? Are they still good for you? Right. So I think it's very much this like fluid journey. And the more, present we become, and for me as well, the more lucid I can be in my life, the greater I feel at peace. And I think that's ultimately what I feel like you're kind of speaking to, because from that peaceful place, we are in alignment. And then whatever appears, whether it's people or archetypes or a dream or whatever it is, we're approaching it in a very different manner, right? And you've said this multiple times, which I love so much. Um, I feel like you should have maybe written like a little blurb for the book. Is that, it's not, it's literally, it's literally about how we show up, right? And not what it's our inner world that we're projecting onto the external. So it's hugely helpful.
It is, but it also takes a level of accountability, right? Because as soon as I tell people that, I said, find an area of your life that's not working for you, and then have a look at what are you thinking, feeling about that specific area of your life, and that's where the work begins. And so that some people feel that's too much for me to carry. So much easier to blame the external world, so much easier to point at something. And that links back to what you were saying about practicing being, just sitting, whether it's 5, 10, 15 minutes. And I find that even a lot of people struggle, or many struggle with it because of the internal dialogue and the narratives that they've got looping, and making them feel like they're stuck. Rather than having a look at this could be that the trajectory or that stepping stone onto that next phase of my life. Athena, I'm really curious, what changes have you experienced working with the medial archetype?
It's been such a wonderful journey for me, but incredibly difficult at the same time. And I think part of that is because one, this kind of archetype brings that, right? You have to, I feel like I can only write about what I know, right? And so I've written in the way that I can best describe it through my experiences, right? And so something that's been hugely helpful for me is that I have experienced a lot in my life, severe kind of judgment, because I had an internalized shame about it, about being what I would say like mystically inclined, or being mediumistic, or going out of body, or lucid dreaming, and not having language for that at specific stages in my life. And so part of one of the best blessings for me with medial archetype is that there has actually always been great language, and a great term that mediates both. And so, like you're saying, nowadays, it's not even really a thing, but a lot of my lived experience was that. And something that I share in the book, although online I feel the mystical and spiritual stuff is deeply celebrated, and because of the way technology is set up, you can so easily and wonderfully find community in that way. I think that's one of the greatest benefits of tech currently. But in lived experience, I would not say that that is everywhere. We can see that in many places in the world. Even the word seer from my book, if you Google seer, it often will change the word in the search engine. And so I think as much as it is, definitely increasing in awareness, it's becoming way more normal. I think much younger generations naturally appreciate it and have the ability to connect in a way that maybe isn't as difficult as what I think I went through, and many other people worldwide went through. Like back in the day for me, I grew up in a place where, if I think I was so interested in learning about topics, but could not get information. This was pre-internet. I'd go to the library and find little tidbits, but couldn't find information. And then one of my friend's grandmothers, who was the town kind of eccentric, she'd walk backwards up the driveway when it was a full moon with her dog, she gifted me a tarot deck, and it was this Egyptian deck that was totally archetypal. I was like 11 or 13 and I couldn't understand a damn thing. It had no guidebook, no guidebook, but she gifted it to me. So part of one of the best things for me doing this work, I feel, is one, helping other people just recognize, oh, this is a total normal aspect of life. And then it personally gave me a lot of peace that, like, oh wow, look, through all this kind of journeying, there's something so beautiful that has come up from it.
That's so beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So I am very conscious of your time, Athena. Is there any question I haven't asked you before we go to our 3 shiny golden nuggets?
No, I think we've gone through quite a lot and quite a deep conversation.
Amazing, amazing. So let's do it. As we wrap up, we always love to ask our guests to share 3 shiny golden nuggets. They could be 3 practical exercises. Athena, what would those be for you?
The first is, in a world of seriousness, find play, like we were talking about. We all naturally know how to play. I'm not going to give people a how to. Just do what makes you feel good. Um, the second how to, I would say, for anyone who is interested in this kind of work, is just to begin practicing recording their dreams if they aren't already. A simple practice of just writing down the last dream you remember can be enough to re-energize the dreaming memory and dream recall. And the third practice that I would say is exactly what we've talked about, is a little 2-minute silent practice of just being. And in addition to that, to see if the person who's sitting can gain meta awareness. So like awareness of the thoughts that they're thinking.
I love all 3 of those. Thank you so much. So where do you hang out the most? We'll have everything in the show notes. Where do you hang out the most?
So currently, in terms of social media, it's Instagram for me. It's Athena_Laz, but the best place for people to start off with is on my website. I spend a lot of time on my newsletter, and that's the best way. So people can sign up there, athenalaz.com, and there are a whole lot of freebies that I offer as offerings for people joining.
Beautiful. And we'll have also the first interview as well in the show notes for those that want to check out both interviews. Athena, it's been an absolute honor to have you back on the show again. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of wisdom, and good luck with the new book. I'm looking forward to having a deep dive into it myself and getting familiar with the Medial archetype, which is not something I've ever come across. So thank you for the introduction.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always love to speak to you.
Thank you.